Hello, YouTube. So, this week in America, the United States of America, the good old U.S.A. America, Donald Trump, the racist, xenophobic bigot who's somehow leading a successful presidential campaign, according to the polls right now, made a rather controversial statement declaring that all Muslims should be barred from entering into as well as living in the good old U.S.A. So this video is going to be a refute towards that very xenophobic idea. I am going to be reading from a script, and so if I fumble my words, there will probably be an awkward jump cut where you'll be like, that looks like a jump cut, and I will reply to you, yes, that's because it is, and I'm bad at forming words with my mouth. It's also going to sound rehearsed because I researched a lot of stuff for this. I looked at a lot of polls. All of my research, all of the sites I took research from are linked in the description of this video, so you can look at those if you want to know I'm not just pulling facts out of my ass. But I did write a script for this video because I wanted it to sound, well, cohesive, and I also wanted to actually have some facts to support my arguments, which immediately puts me at a higher level of intellectual debate than Donald Trump. So, first, in order to make the response well educated, we have to go over just what a refugee has to do in order to gain asylum in the good old U.S.A. So let's begin. First off, the average amount of time it takes your average refugee to find asylum or be granted asylum in the USA is anywhere from 18 to 24 months. That's a rather large amount of time to stay in a war-torn country without any assurance of being granted asylum. The process can take a minimum of 6 weeks in the quickest of cases and last up to 13 years in the longest of cases. In case you're wondering where I'm getting this information, it's from my professor at the university I'm going to, who works at the Torture Refugee Center in Dallas and who regularly shepherds refugees from all manner of countries through this process of gaining asylum. Immediately, you'll notice that those who insist that refugee applicants to the U.S. get instant access are totally wrong. It's, in fact, a very long, bureaucratic, grueling process that is anything but easy to endure. In order to get an idea of just how convoluted this whole process is, here's a flowchart, a spreadsheet type thing on my face, which serves two purposes. One, you will be able to stop looking at my ugly face, and two, you will be able to get an idea of just how long it takes somebody to gain asylum in the US. So this myth of instant access has been disproven, but what about the more prominent fear many seem to have, that of everyone being granted access, or every applicant or every refugee being granted access into the United States? The idea that we'll let anybody into the US. Well, there is some pretty harsh evidence against that claim as well. Let's take a pool of 100 imaginary refugees applying from all around the world. Out of that 100, 25 win asylum affirmatively, aka the court that's hearing their plea decides they have a credible reason to fear their home country and are indeed a refugee. 21 win in defensive asylum, aka the court doesn't agree with them in the affirmative asylum process, but then comes to agree with them in the defensive asylum seeking process. 21 are denied in defensive asylum, 7 abandon their cases because it's taking too long, 15 withdraw them, and 8 go missing in action. You know, they disappear. If you then take that pool of 100 refugees and say that they're from Syria, the success rate goes down because the US is using far more rigid screening for Syrian refugees than they do for the average refugee. There's an interview process, it's long and it's super extensive. They use psychologists, lie detectors, everything they can. Any records they can pull about the people who are applying for refuge, they will use. Now, there's also this fear that all of the refugees being admitted will be these scary Muslim ISIS fighters who will come and bomb everything you love and kill your family. Well, according to President Obama, 67% of the Syrian refugees admitted so far have been women and children. The rest of that majority make up really young, like teenage adolescent boys or old people, infirm. So if you want an actual statistic of how many men of fighting age are being let into the US out of this pool of 10,000 refugees that have been granted access, I can give you a figure on that. 2% of the Syrian refugees that have applied for asylum and are being admitted to the U.S. are of fighting age and ability. So, now that we are armed with this information that not everybody who applies for asylum is admitted and that the screening process is far more involved than a lot of people think, let's talk about the current controversy surrounding Syrian refugees being allowed into the US. Trump, for example, who claimed that 250,000 refugees were being admitted, and in reality the number is 10,000, recently called for a ban on all Muslims from the US, as I mentioned in the beginning of this video. Now, it's easy enough to draw comparisons in this statement to how Hitler's internment of the Jews or even the US government's internment of Asian Americans after Pearl Harbor started, and those are both valid comparisons to make because Trump's statement is rooted in the same xenophobia that caused those events to occur in their countries. But those comparisons simply show us how wrong Trump is instead of focusing on why the US should actually admit Syrian refugees. So let's actually focus on the positives. There have been dozens of studies that show that migrants and refugees end up bringing significantly more revenue to the countries they migrate to than they cost that country to bring them in. In addition, multiple studies have also shown that refugees and migrants are no more likely to end up in social housing or commit crime than the average citizen. In addition, the household income for the average migrant or refugee family is actually around $12,000 more than the average household income for the average American-born family. If you want sources, there are, as I mentioned, a few in the description, and a simple Google search will turn up many more. The US faces a crippling problem right now in the form of national debt, and bringing in a new group of people who could work or at some point in the future will work in the US would help complete the revitalization of our economy. Refugees are also more likely to want to return home than immigrants because, by definition, a refugee doesn't actually want to leave their country, they're forced to because of social or religious persecution. So, those who are afraid that suddenly the US will have thousands of new faces taking so-called American jobs forever, well, they might be right, but they also might be wrong. But enough of that. I suppose I had better address the why don't they stay in their own country and fight argument for those few special bigots who need that point addressed. There are people who are far more predispositioned towards finding conflict than others. That's why there are people who will sign up for the army without even thinking about it, and then there are people like me who will never do that unless there is a draft. Some people, believe it or not, simply don't want to kill anyone. What's more is this argument is completely discounting the fact that there are Syrians right now who are actively fighting ISIS. It's an argument that makes absolutely no sense. I don't want to kill anyone. I hate fighting. Being completely honest, if I was given the choice to avoid conflict and go to a different country, or probably die fighting enemies on two fronts, as the Syrian rebels who oppose both Assad and ISIS are currently doing, I would run, and I bet most of the people watching this video would be right there alongside of me. People are acting like these refugees that are being admitted to the US will be ISIS informants, fighters, or suicide bombers. The reality is that these people are scared, they're helpless, they're afraid, and they are often alone. They don't want to fight. They didn't want to watch their family members be killed, and they didn't want to have to carry pieces of their family out of a house just because a US-sanctioned airstrike happened to hit a civilian area. But those people did have to do those things, and now they are trying to escape. They're trying to escape ISIS, a radical Islamist terrorist organization that represents nothing of true Islam, whatever that means. A religion is molded by its followers. Islam isn't violent because of ISIS, just like Christianity isn't violent because of the KKK. Violent people often find solace in religion because it gives them order and meaning. And so they twist their religion of choice to be as they are, violent. I don't assume all Catholics are evil because Hitler happened to be Catholic. I do, however, think that Hitler's Christianity was evil. I don't assume all Muslims are evil because of ISIS. I do, however, think that ISIS's form of Islam is evil. Want a statistic? 74% of law agencies around the world say that they're concerned about anti-government terrorist acts committed by people born in their own country. In contrast, 39% of law agencies say that they're concerned about refugees committing acts of terror. Currently, in the US right now, you're 7 times more likely to be killed by a white Christian extremist than you are by a Muslim terrorist. And guess what? That probably won't change once the refugees from Syria are admitted into the country, because of the 784,000 refugees that have been admitted into the US since 9/11, three of them have been arrested for possibly colluding with terrorists, and 2 of the people who were arrested for colluding with terrorists overseas, aka the terrorist acts that they were colluding with these terrorists about would not have taken place in the US and would not have affected US civilians. In contrast, anti-government Christian terrorists have been responsible for 337 in-country attacks since 9/11 that have resulted in 254 fatalities in the United States of America. How can gun users claim that the mass shootings that so plague the US right now are done by mentally unstable fringe radicals that don't represent white gun owners, and then turn around and want every Muslim barred from entering the US because they think ISIS represents all Muslims? Such hypocrisy is absolutely astounding. People are scared, and when people are scared, they look for someone with authority. Unfortunately, people right now seem to be looking towards xenophobic bigots such as Donald Trump. The xenophobia that is causing this wave of fear is exactly what ISIS wants. ISIS wants to drive a wedge in between Muslims and the West, because doing so only further promotes their all Westerners are insane radicals who must be killed message. By sinking to this level of xenophobia and small-mindedness, we are sinking to the level of those who we despise in every possible way, and therefore empowering them. Only by rising above this, to a level of decency that really should be effortless to attain, will we be better than those we want to destroy. The US, we've made ourselves the world's police. We have 662 overseas military bases in 38 foreign countries. This year, our military spending budget was $601 billion, more than the next 7 countries combined. If we're going to act like we own the world, and will help out the weak and punish the acts of the unjust, no matter what, it's time we started putting our money where our mouth is. If we don't, not only are we grandstanding, we're doing it badly. You want the reality? Here it is. There very, very rarely have been any negative side effects associated with bringing in refugees from a country. It improves diplomacy. It improves economy. It improves diversity. It improves global worldviews. In the end, when it comes down to it, there really isn't a valid, non-xenophobic reason to say no to bringing Syrian refugees into the US, because doing so improves us. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, be sure to leave whatever you want. If you didn't, dislike it. Whatever. Have a great day.